Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Ask Me Anything. I see people are still coming in, so we will give them a few more seconds before we get started. Just a few housekeeping things that I put in the chat, but want to just go over as people are joining. First and foremost, really appreciative of everyone being here, knowing how busy schedules are. We will be recording today's Ask Me Anything and sending that out to everyone that is registered, as well as the slides. So we'll be making sure you get that as soon as possible. We're also going to be using the Q&A. So apologies, I mentioned the chat feature earlier for those of you that joined at the beginning, but we will utilize the Q&A feature if there are questions that come up throughout today's presentation. Thank you to those people that included your questions when you registered. And so we tried to bake in responses to as many of those questions as we could throughout today's presentation. You can see today's agenda. We're going to have welcome remarks by Katy Knight, who's the President and Executive Director of Siegel Family Endowment. And then we will spend a few moments going through updates to our strategy across both our grant making and research team. And then really want to make sure we have the bulk of today's time for Q&A. So again, going through some of the questions that were included during the registration, but also your live questions that might come up. So without any further ado, I will turn it over to Katy Knight, who is the President and Executive Director of Siegel Family Endowment. Take it away, Katy.
Thanks, Josh. Hi, friends. I am so glad you're all here. I love that the webinar feature lets us reach so many people, although I do miss the option of seeing all your faces. I'm that person that's always looking through the gallery to make sure that everyone's happy when we're having a Zoom. So hope to be able to see more of you online or in person soon. I'm really excited for us to have this AMA today. I think we've done this a couple times now and have been able to really share out the sort of process and feedback that we're able to gather from the community of our grantees and partners, and also just what our reflections are on the state of the world and how that is influencing the work that we'll do. You'll see that, we have some new priorities, some new lines of inquiry, and things that we are thinking about really deeply as we head into the next year plus of grant making, which doesn't mean that we've abandoned other priorities or that we're leaving behind some of our core work, but just given how much and how rapidly things are changing around us, we are thinking about how we can keep up with that. We've always tried to be as close to the cutting edge as possible, and that definitely is not stopping anytime soon, particularly as we think about the emergence of AI into the public consciousness. I was joking with someone yesterday. I'm coming up on 5 years this year leading this organization, and about 8, I think, with the organization in total. And for most of that time, I have had to explain to people why the impact of technology on society mattered and what that even meant. Often I would say I work at a technology-focused foundation. People would say, oh, great, you give computers to schools. And while hardware is really important, that is not what we do. And those of you who have worked with us for a long time have known that. And now in the last 18 months or so, it's been a real rapid shift from what do you mean the impact of technology on society to, hey, how are we going to solve this AI thing and its impact on society? Obviously, we don't have the answers to that yet, and we hope to get there. But I do think that the depth that we've been able to get to with so many of our partners and the work that we've done in the last several years have positioned us hopefully really well to meet the challenge of the moment and to help continue to sort of support our mission of seeing everyone have the opportunity to thrive in an innovation and technology driven world. I always say that we're in it with technology for better or for worse. So we're looking to leverage the good and also mitigate the risk and harm that comes with pervasive technology in our lives. And we're really grateful to all of our partners and interested parties that continue to push us to think deeply about these questions and come up with the possible solutions that will push us all forward and make a better society for everyone. With that, I'm happy to turn it back to Josh to dig into the meat of it, and looking forward to hearing your questions and thoughts on what we have coming up.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Katy. So yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. And so one thing I will say is that as we send out the slides, we'll have a more detailed version that will include deeper background as to who we are. Some of you might have attended our first AMA last year that went into kind of a brief history and a timeline about the origins of the foundation. So we'll make sure to include some of that background information for those of you that might be new to the work that we do. But my name is Joshua Elder. I'm the Vice President and Head of Grantmaking. Really excited to see so many familiar, I'll say names and not faces, and also new names out there who are interested in finding out more about what we do. Katy alluded to this, but we are a foundation focused on understanding and shaping the impact of technology on society. And you can imagine now more than ever, the role that technology is playing. This isn't super important. And so what we mean by that, as we know, that's very broad. We really drill down across three primary interest areas, or some people might call them portfolio areas: learning, workforce, and infrastructure. And all of that work that we do, especially within our grant making, is really deeply rooted in the inquiry-driven approach to our grant making, which is rooted in the scientific method. And we'll have a visual that kind of shows what that process looks like across all aspects of grant making and research. And so last year, many of you probably received our year in review. I won't ask who completed the crossword puzzle in there, but it was an exciting time and period of organizational growth. So you'll see some of the team pictured below with our chairman, David Siegel, but it was an opportunity to grow across research, our grant making team, external engagement, operations, that really allowed for us to create capacity to do many more things. But all of that was really focused on like understanding the lessons that we've been able to learn from many of you that have been our partners for over the years. And so I was really excited to kind of reflect and share some of the key insights, as well as preview some of the things that we're going to talk about today that will be driving our strategy forward. And so our guiding star, and so for some of you that are new to our work, this year we wanted to kind of focus on three core pieces that are going to drive the work that we do. And so the first thing is being intentional and a strong focus on equitable grant making that is elevating the grantees, it fosters connection, and really is the opportunity to generate tangible learning outcomes. The second piece is really thinking about how do we codify, reflect on, and share what we're learning to help inform our strategy. And so you'll hear some of the things that we've been learning over the years, as well as feedback from some of you that are current grantees that have led to some of the changes that you'll hear in regards to our programmatic strategies. And then the last thing is prioritizing collaboration, really thinking about how do we prioritize collaboration that will strengthen our work and our community amongst our grantees and partners, but also across the broader philanthropic community that we're a part of. And so within that, we'll jump into our interest areas. And so the first interest area that we will talk about will be our learning interest area. And so actually we can go back to the previous slide. So I mentioned at the top that everything is rooted in the inquiry-driven approach or the scientific method. And so this is what we mean when we think about how we root this into the scientific method. As you'll hear today's strategy, it really centers around a set of inquiry questions that we have worked as an entire organization across all the different aspects of our work to really think about what are timely, relevant questions that are impacting society, and how can we go about answering some of these questions through partnership, through our grant making, through our research opportunities, performing landscape analysis, looking at the research that's out there, supporting the work in the field, which is through our grant making arm. How do we collect and publish the findings? You'll hear my colleagues talk a little bit about that as we think about what does that look like across our knowledge and impact section. Convening stakeholders. So many of you have been part of different convenings that we've had both in person and in virtual. And then how do we apply what we're learning back to the beginning of that question and really determine the hypothesis that we set out to test? Was it correct? Was it incorrect? What did we learn? Do we need to go through another iteration of this method to be able to really produce the findings that we're hoping to have, all having the impact on society? And so our first example of that is learning. So our learning interest area, you'll see the next few slides will be oriented around a belief statement. And so with our learning, we truly believe that multidimensional learning ecosystems consider the whole learner, the whole school, and whole community are a crucial path towards more equitable outcomes. And so as we think about like, what is that timely, relevant question that we're looking at, we're asking ourselves, how can we shift systems, knowing that there are multiple systems in terms of education, shift systems in ways that drive equitable outcomes and create opportunities for learners and their communities. And within that, what we're prioritizing is really looking for initiatives that are going to pilot inventions and scale transformative interventions that incorporate flexibility and rigor, enable all learners to thrive in a rapidly evolving society. And so, for those of you that have been around, some of the other things that you might not have heard as we're thinking about what this kind of system looks like for learners, some of the things that we will continue to support will be computational thinking, computer and data science, schools as community infrastructure, all things we believe are integral to what a system that responds and is flexible to all students and community. And then the new areas that we're going to be looking into this year, obviously you're going to hear AI. You can't go a single conversation without hearing it, but really looking at AI in education, field coordination and efforts, some of you that are in the computer science education space or data science education, you know, there's many different movements that are out there. And one of the roles that we're playing as funders is coordinating those efforts. And then really thinking about evidence-driven ed tech, knowing that there's a proliferation of ed tech products that are out there, and how can we make sure as people are making decisions, they're rooted in evidence and research for best practices and choices for ed tech. And so after that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, John Irons, who'll take us through the other two interest areas that we are focused on. John?
Great. Thanks, Josh. So hello, everyone. My name is John Irons. I'm a Senior Vice President and Head of Research here at Siegel. I'm going to, like Josh said, I'm going to try to cover the workforce and infrastructure issue areas briefly. Obviously, we can dive into them more during the Q&A, and then give everyone an update on some of our research activities as well. So on the workforce side, as Josh said, as Katy said, we all know that the emergence of generative AI in the public discourse last year has led everyone to question the impact of AI on just about everything, including on the workforce. But at a high level, we know this discussion is nothing new. Questions of like, will technology displace jobs, or how will technology change work, are always asked about each wave of new technology, and it's no different this time. At the same time, we believe that AI and emerging technologies are fundamentally shaping the nature of work and employment, which leads us to ask how new technologies can improve work, not just how it might harm work. How might we best empower workers and communities to shape and utilize new technologies and prevent harms in the workplace? And towards this end, we are prioritizing advancing actionable insights into how AI and emerging technologies transform work in the work environment. We aim to support organizations that address workers' needs and perspectives around work impacting technologies through pilot programs, case studies, and other initiatives. Alongside this, we also aim to continue our learning in the areas of educators in the workforce. We know that educators make up a big part of the workforce, and we want to connect this work with our education work. We also are, thinking about innovative financing mechanisms within skill development programs in rural workforce ecosystems. And these are areas that we've invested in the past and are still looking to engage with in the future. So turning to our third issue area, which, as many of you know, is infrastructure. So we continue to ground our work in our perspective that we need to collectively think about infrastructure as fundamentally multidimensional, including physical, social, and digital dimensions. I know many of you are familiar with our white paper that laid out this framework from a couple of years ago. Maybe we can drop that into the chat as well, but I know this is something that many of you have already seen. And we continue to believe that vibrant communities require just and equitable infrastructures, and the reverse, and that just and equitable infrastructures require engaged communities. Without power sharing with engaged communities, inequalities will continue to grow. This perspective, again, leads us to ask, how might we increase meaningful participation and the agency of communities to shape the development, deployment, use, and stewardship of the digital infrastructures in which we all rely? So we're prioritizing supporting practices that empower communities in co-creating sustainable digital, social, and physical infrastructures centered on unique values, needs, and aspirations. So we'll also be continuing our learning in the areas of public interest technology, in which we've been heavily invested in recent years, and civic knowledge, which we think about as being, news, libraries, museums, and areas that really create, again, vibrant knowledge within communities. And then finally, we're also thinking about the interplay of technology and climate. How is technology contributing to climate change, and how can we use technology to help mitigate it as well? So that's an area that we're grappling with. So I think that covers our three interest areas. Again, we can dive into them more during the Q&A. But let me turn to some of our research efforts in recent years. So on that front, many of you are familiar with both what I call affectionately the three N's in terms of knowledge, insights, and in networks. So we aim to develop knowledge, to generate actual insights, and to support research networks through our work. This is both through our grant making to research institutions, but also to our fellowship program and through our internal staff capacity as well. At a very broad level, we very focus our research areas at the intersection of technology and social sciences, focusing on the topics you see here around intelligence, information, innovation, design, decisions, and development. Again, this is consistent with our approach in recent years as well. A couple of things that we're thinking about, kind of within the research team, but as an organization as a whole. In 2024, we're really keeping an eye on not just these three, but these three are kind of forefront in our minds. First, technology policy. So we're thinking about what democratic values should inform and guide the shaping and implementation of our technology policy writ large. We found this to be an important emerging issue that spans all of our inquiry areas, including workforce and infrastructure, as I mentioned, but also in our education system as they're grappling with the impact of various tech tools. Second, like everybody else, we're trying to understand the impact of generative AI across our inquiry areas. How can we identify and mitigate harms? Will AI increase or decrease inequality, right? So these are just two questions out of many, many that we have and that we're asking ourselves. And third, we're continuing to ask ourselves, what will be the next wave of essentially big questions that we as a society need to tackle? We're going to have more to say on this soon and look forward to hearing from you all as well as we think about what are the next wave of questions we need to grapple with. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Madison, who's going to cover a bit on our Research Fellows program as well as the Research Advisory Council. And then I will be back to talk a bit more about knowledge and impact. But over to you, Madison.
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. My name is Madison Snyder. I'm a research fellow here with Siegel. I'm going to talk a little bit, like John said, about our Research Fellows program as well as the Research Advisory Council. In the fall of 2023, we welcomed our third cohort of the Siegel Research Fellowship program. And this year we have 15 fellows that are hosted by a range of academic institutions, civil society organizations, independent research institutes, as well as a creative research and design firm. And we are really looking forward to gathering these fellows every month to talk about the work that they are focusing on, as well as fostering collaboration among this multidisciplinary group. Each fellow is a thought leader on many of the most pressing issues at the intersection of technology and society. And this cohort, we are excited to launch a new series on our Insights page called the Fellow Spotlight Series, which shares with our broader community the wonderful work that these fellows are doing. And I would encourage you to check that out. In the fall of 2024, we're looking forward to welcoming our fourth cohort of fellows. And this current cohort you see here will then join our growing alumni network, which right now is at about 20 former fellows. We also convened last year a research advisory council, and this has been a really interesting exploration comprised of senior level leaders at the intersection of technology and society. And it's a really valuable resource to us as an organization as we aim to remain responsive to the fast changing technology landscape and look to experts like these to help guide our own thinking. And I'll pass it back to John.
Okay, great. Thanks, Madison. Like I said, I'm going to turn now to say a bit more about our knowledge and impact approach. And Josh showed you this slide already, and we really do use this on a regular basis to guide our work. I want to spend a couple more minutes on what you see circled there on the slide, which is How do we think about knowledge and impact? And in 2024, I think we are really doubling down on some of these approaches. Let me walk you through a little bit how we're approaching it. The first thing to say is that we're deliberately deviating from a traditional like M&E framing. So monitoring and evaluation, I'm sure most of you on this call have been through some kind of a process with other foundations to monitoring and evaluation. We are framing it up as MEA, really emphasizing that the assessment piece. So monitoring, evaluation, and assessment. We recognize that too often M&E can be a check the box kind of exercise without really kind of diving more deeply into what does it actually mean for our work as a foundation, but also everybody else's work in your respective fields. Our MEA work follows what we're calling a Bayesian approach. If there are any statisticians out there, you might be familiar with how this might work. But basically, we think about MEA in three stages. First, we want to be explicit about what we are testing and what assumptions we are making about the work and the relevant system. In the Bayesian context, what is our prior? So what is our prior set of beliefs? The second stage, we want to be explicit about what evidence we are gathering to help answer those questions. And then finally, we want to be explicit about what we have learned and how our assumptions have changed. And in the Bayesian sense, it's called a posterior distribution. So, what do we believe? What do we learn? What do we believe? What evidence are we gathering to learn more? And then how have our beliefs changed? A couple notes about this approach in terms of how more or less our guiding principles behind it. First, we want to base what we are testing in our inquiry questions. So the questions that we pose in our issue areas are going to be fundamental to how we form the initial set of questions we have and assumptions. Second, we define success as what we learned, even if the project might otherwise have, quote unquote, failed. We believe that the learning is really the key to the work that we're trying to do. Third, we aim to generate insights that are useful by others. It's not just for us for internal purposes. We want to make sure that we are generating insights that can be used more broadly. And then finally, we aim to tailor the MEA methodology and evidence to the grantee, to strategy, and to the specific learning questions we have. So what does this mean? This means that we might not rely on traditional metrics that you might see other foundations use. We want to be pretty clear about what we were trying to measure and how. And that doesn't mean we're counting things necessarily. Measurement and observations takes many forms. We don't have a set empirical methodology like a randomized controlled trial or something like that. So we want to approach this in a way that makes sense for everyone. And there's no, like I said, because there's no one size fits all, we really aim to be collaborative in defining an approach that works for all. So again, this is not us imposing something on grantees, but we really want to work with grantees to figure out, okay, what does it make sense to articulate as the learnings we want to see from the work going forward. And then finally, we're dedicating internal staff to help support grantees and to collaborate, right? So we'll roll up our sleeves with you to do this work too. So I'm going to stop there and turn it over to Kyla, who's going to talk about how we show up as partners.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. Hi, everybody. I'm Kyla Stewart. I'm the Senior Knowledge and Impact Associate here at Siegel, and I've been given the really exciting opportunity to talk to you a little bit more about how we think about partnership here. John actually teed me up really nicely in his outline of our knowledge and impact work because our view of partnership is deeply rooted in our inquiry-based approach as well. We hope to connect with our grantees as learning partners and show up with them every day through our practice. And both of these intentions are really well encapsulated by our effective philanthropy framing. Effective philanthropy to us is an approach that we've talked about for many years, and I'm sure many of you have heard us talk about it before. This philosophy has shaped our grant-making process to date and has served as a touchstone for us to reference when we're making all of these different strategic decisions, and this is especially true for the last year. This year, we're refreshing our effective philanthropy strategy, and that means that we're going to be doubling down on the things that we care about and further recommitting ourselves to the improvement of philanthropic practice through the strengthening of our partners. Our strategy remains two-pronged as it always has been, part of that being internal work and the other part being external facing. Our internal practice includes our 2024 grant-making process update. As many of you know, iteration is really core to our values, and we aim to improve every year based upon grantee feedback and partner feedback. This year, we're continuing to prioritize the reduction of grantee burden, which has always been a major priority of ours. And this time, we're really excited to be doing that through the launch of Giving Data, which is our new GMS platform. And you'll hear more about that in a bit. We're also seeking to further build the culture and norms of our own workplace to bolster these processes. And we're doing that through encouraging and embracing risk, fostering staff engagement with our grantees, and building a robust feedback loop between us and our partners. You'll find the most evidence of our refreshed effective philanthropy strategy through our external work, though. We'll continue to leverage our continuous learning and reflection cycles and share back to partners and the field at large through our website, but also through conferences and different convening opportunities that we're really excited to engage with this year. We're also extremely excited to be embracing a new opportunity to use grant making as part of learning in this space. We've collaborated a lot over the past year, and we've developed a working group and have identified 3 different core areas of exploration in this space that we're hoping to leverage new and existing grant partnerships to learn in. So we're interested in 1, how can we build a bespoke approach to addressing specific and long-running capacity building needs of small and mid-sized nonprofits? 2, how can we identify, support, and cultivate early-stage social entrepreneurs and foster a strong and diverse nonprofit sector leadership sector? And 3rd, how can we reimagine the study of scale and impact in our work to best serve our partners? It's a really exciting new era for effective philanthropy, and there's still a lot of development that needs to be done. So we're looking forward to sharing back with you throughout the year as we make progress. But in the meantime, I'll pass it over to my colleague, Allie, who is one of our grant making managers, to talk a little bit more about the changes that we're making this year.
Thanks so much, Kyla. Hello, everyone. My name is Allie Chin. I'm one of the grant making managers here at Siegel. And just to build off of what Kyla discussed, we really emphasize grantee feedback to continue to improve our approaches to grant making and our partnerships. So for this webinar, we've gotten a lot of questions about how we incorporate grantee voice. We gather feedback through several different methods. So this includes conversations with grantees throughout the year, our end-of-year survey, and also confidential grantee interviews that are conducted by an independent researcher and writer. We then review and reflect on this feedback as a team to ensure we really close that feedback loop. And so we'll actually drop in the chat an insights post that we published last year about this, if you'd like to take a look. And we're working on releasing a new post for 2023, which is really guiding what you're seeing here today. We pulled out some key themes from what we've heard from grantees in 2023, so over here on the left. And in response to this, we're prioritizing proactive transparency. So when it comes to renewals specifically, we're making sure we have a process for when and how to have these conversations. Knowing that this process is also not one size fits all for all organizations, but we're ensuring that we stay flexible and nimble throughout the process. We're also responding with convening for collective learning. I saw a question in the chat as well about this. We've heard from our grantees that they'd like to connect and learn with other partners at the different intersections of our interest areas and across fields. And we're looking to really intentionally create spaces to facilitate these opportunities that are additive for grantees as well. We're also continuing to focus on amplifying insights from Siegel and our partners, as well as codifying co-learning in our grants, particularly with our knowledge and impact work that we talked about a couple of slides before. And what some of this looks like in action for our grantees this year, we're really excited to be transitioning to Giving Data, so our new grants management system that's intended to streamline our grant making. We've partnered with Just Fund to offer our grantees the option to join the Just Fund platform, which connects funders and organizations. And then we're also launching office hours with our team members, community spaces driven by the interests of our grantees, as well as other Siegel events. And these events will all mostly be virtual. So we're balancing how to do in-person events of our own and at conferences too, but all with the intent to drive community building and learning across our portfolio. And now I'll pass it over to Laura for our Q&A.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much. I realized we just threw a lot of information at you, and I see the questions are pouring in, which is really exciting. We also received 100 questions via the form, so I'm really excited to dive in. So I'm going to just start with a few that we've received online, and some of them are, just the basics. So this one, I'll kick it over to Josh and Allie, but can you explain just a little bit about our grant making process? We had some questions about whether we have an application or an RFP, about single year versus multi-year funding. Are there different processes for different amounts? What are the timelines? All of that sort of batch of questions.
No, excellent questions. And I'll kick it over to Allie to respond, and happy to throw in some additional detail as well.
Great, thanks, Josh. So building partnerships with organizations is really core to our grant making process. So I'll start there. Just to start, we prioritize making ourselves available and meeting with groups in various ways. So that includes having this AMA, for example, amplifying when we're at different events and conferences so we can connect with folks there in person. We also do active sourcing, so doing research and reaching out to organizations, in addition to looking to both our partners and peer funders for recommendations too. So given our inquiry-driven approach, we have a set of questions that we aim to explore in partnership with our grantees. So part of our grant-making process is really having conversations with organizations to understand their work and their ideas and what they're seeking to learn, right? And to see if there's alignment with our learning goals and our mission as well. Just from there, we start to collaborate and shape the grant together. So some of you have asked if we have an application process. We don't have applications or RFPs or set timelines. Our grant making process is really flexible, so timelines can vary, but we can say that typical time period from the beginning of the process, so first initial connection, to the end of the process with approval of a grant ranges from 6 to 12 months. And we can also drop in the chat some sample grantee journeys so you can get an idea of what this could potentially look like. Did I answer all those questions? Josh, anything else you would add?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. One thing I'll note that some of you have interacted with one of our other grant making managers, Evan Trout, who is actually out on paternal leave, but will be back with us later this year. So just wanted to let you all know if some of you have met him or will be interacting with both Allie and Evan on the grant side. And I think the only other piece, back to the relationship component and why we really pride ourselves on getting to know the grantees and thinking about how they align to the strategy. And there was a question in the Q&A. It's because it allows for us to think about connections. So as we are looking at opportunities to support programmatic work or research across the 3 interest areas, we're also looking for opportunities at the areas of intersection. And so I think there was a question about, do we look for grantees that are sitting at the different intersections between learning, workforce, and infrastructure? And absolutely. But also we're able to make connections that might not easily be seen on paper, but because we spend the time getting to know the potential grantees and during the grantee engagement process, once we have those partners, we're able to make those connections across portfolio and connect grantees as well. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like in grantee engagement later.
And sort of related to that, a question that came in just about our focus on global work versus funding in the US, if you could say a bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Most of our grants that we focus on are primarily domestic and in the US. We are a national funder, so we have work happening across the US. Obviously, we are based here in New York City, and so we do have a large kind of concentration of work that happens across the 3 interest areas in our own backyard. And then some of you have been a part of the work that we've been doing in 2 specific places. One much broader being the rural America work that we've been doing within our workforce interest area and looking at opportunities to expand that in the learning space. And then also some of the deep work that we've been doing with great partners in Atlanta, thinking about what does it look like working with local government, local school districts, as well as a local philanthropic community. And so we'll be continuing that work, as well as looking at other areas that we can apply some of those learnings or opportunities that might come up throughout the next year or 2.
And if I might just add to that as well, thinking about some of our research partners, we recognize that the technologies that we're grappling with are being grappled with all over the world. So, there are no boundaries to many of the new technologies that are emerging. And so a lot of our research partners actually tackle issues of global relevance in different kinds of ways, or issues that are based in the global south or other places around the globe. So it's something that we want to learn from other countries, and we feel like knowledge created here in the US will be relevant for other countries as well. But as Josh said, our grant making is primarily US based.
Thanks, everyone. So the next batch of questions that we received ahead of time was really related to, how we decide which organizations to collaborate with and which to fund. So perhaps Josh and John, you could say just a little bit about the types of things that we look for when we're making funding decisions.
Sure, happy to start us off here. And I think some of this you heard from us as we were thinking about what this looked like from last year and lessons learned from the new partners that we've added. I think one of the big pieces that we've really been focused on is just thinking about how do we find partners that are community driven, that really have strong knowledge of issues that are impacting certain communities and are really driven, especially by proximate leaders, to really think about how they can solve some of the issues that are affecting those communities. How are they able to be systems entrepreneurs, really thinking about, again, as we are focusing on the systems change level, they're addressing the issue and problem, but thinking about it at all angles, especially from the systems lens. And then within that, wanting to be a field builder. We talked a little bit about the collaboration opportunities. And so again, as much as someone is focused on the work happening in their community, how can they actively be a part of the broader learning community that we are driving both within our grantees, but also with other people and organizations that we encounter, with our peer funders and their networks, being able to build the field and add the knowledge that they're learning, and thinking about out of the box thinkers as well. Some of you, again, have been around for quite some time. And one of the phrases that we think about and how we view ourselves is acting as society's risk capital. And so how can we find those entrepreneurs or those people that are willing to take a big bet or a risk and really be able to support them early on and think about what's possible and help them build out their idea to kind of have some proof points as to why their solution might be the one that's needed to have the impact that they're hoping to have on society. John, yeah, would love to hear your thoughts as well there.
Yeah, I would just echo what Ali had just said, that partners who are willing to kind of ask themselves questions, and it's really anchored in our inquiry-based approach. If you have everything figured out, great. It might not be the best partner, right? But I don't think anybody has any of these issues fully figured out. So we're really kind of interested in thinking about partners who are grappling with interesting questions and are willing to experiment and try new things for the purpose of creating learnings that would benefit everyone.
Thanks, everyone. I know there was also a question in the chat specifically about participating or like what makes a good fit for our R&D approach. What kind of a successful model would look like there. I don't know, John, if there's anything you want to say on that, or if how that differs from a regular grantee partner.
No, I mean, I'll give a very unsatisfactory answer, which is it depends. That the kind of partner, like I said, will be a good learning partner with us, and I think hopefully we're a good learning partner for other organizations too. And it really is kind of, like I said, kind of being explicit about what we're trying to learn together is really, I think, very important. And so I think that's kind of our ultimate goal.
I'd just add, I think the other part of that question also asked about sort of research versus implementation. And I think we think about research obviously is research, but implementation can also be research. And that's why our sort of Bayesian approach to monitoring and evaluation and our learning journeys are really important to us, because I often say our programmatic grants are the field experiments that are meant to go alongside the theoretical or academic research that we're funding and supporting in other parts of the ecosystem.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I guess the next sort of, I think, theme I'm kind of picking up on the questions is just kind of digging into some more specifics around our funding priority. So I guess first and foremost, Josh, you already sort of mentioned that you can't sort of go anywhere without bumping into a generative AI conversation. So I didn't know if you wanted to expand a little bit more. We got some questions about how generative AI is shaping our strategy. I got some specific questions about our learning strategy, but it affects our whole portfolio. So John and Josh want to say a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's not just limited to the learning portfolio. You heard from workforce and even infrastructure when we think about digital infrastructure. And I think the short answer is yes, it's influencing it. But I think that's where having this inquiry-driven approach is so exciting because we're not coming to this with a answer or solution. Really thinking about there's so many different questions that we're looking at in terms of the impact that AI is having on education, the impact that it's having on the workforce. And so I think for us, really excited and knowing how rapidly this is going to evolve, and that some of these questions or hypotheses that we have developed now might change in the next 2 to 3 months. So I think this is a really emergent area for us that will be full of different opportunities that we're going to be looking into, knowing that it's here, it's not going away. And so just looking at the impact that it will have, and innovative ideas and solutions, and then thinking about the piece around the evidence and research as well. So excited to see what's out there. I know everyone's thinking about it. And again, you can't go a conversation without hearing it. So definitely will be impacting us and keen to learn from others that are out there.
Yeah, I would just add like a very specific example. Katy and I are currently in South Carolina at a local news summit that Aspen Digital is running. And the question everybody asking here is like, how is AI can impact local news? Not just from a like fake news perspective, but like how can newsrooms use generative AI in their day-to-day, how they can use it to improve their business operations. What are the risks associated with it? And so it's, we hope to kind of help organizations kind of collaborate or foster those collaborations where people are thinking through these complex issues. And there were a couple of questions too about like, think about it across our issue areas. I think we're recognizing that, the kinds of answers, the kinds of questions that are raised here are also being raised in other contexts, in the context of schools. How are schools using AI to further their mission? What are the harms that could come of it? Where are the biases that could be embedded, and how is that going to impact the potential impact of generative AI? So I think it's an area where we're increasingly seeing, I think, connections across and between our issue areas in the research community and the technology community, in ways that we hope to foster, those conversations that really help everybody think through it a bit more.
Great, thanks. I mean, I think too, sort of relatedly, there's our broader public interest technology strategy. There's been some questions in the chat about that. I also want to call out, somebody asked about public digital infrastructure in general. So maybe could you give a little bit of a preview into some of the work that we've done and, how those efforts will be evolving in 2024?
Yeah, and I think Katy can and should weigh in on this as well. But it's been a priority for us, and I think it's only picked up steam because of the AI piece that we were just talking about. Whether it's agencies in the federal government who are thinking about, okay, how do we bring on tech talent who really understands generative AI to respond to the president's executive order, or it's universities who are recognizing that there's probably greater demand for public interest technologists in different contexts. And that could be both public, but also other organizations. I know there was a question in the Q&A about strengthening NGOs' capacity to kind of think about and maybe even implement AI. And so that's something that's been on our mind as well. So yeah, continuing, and I think it's growing in importance because of the, I think, greater awareness of where we are. But Katy, you may want to jump in too.
Yeah, I mean, public interest technology broadly has been really important to us since the inception of the field, which we were involved in with Ford Foundation and others a few years ago. I know there's some questions about funding PIT and also our peer funders, so I'll try to get at some of those in this too, but we are deeply invested in public interest technology through the university network that's housed at New America and is a collaborative between us and several other funders, and as well as the public interest technology infrastructure funder collaborative, which is focused on trying to really shore up the field and create the supports that will allow public interest tech to thrive. We are still investing in those at the table, and a lot of our public interest tech grants will come through those tables. In full transparency, I think an open question for our team is how we decide what is a Siegel grant and what we bring to the table, and that'll be something that I think as we go through this year and see proposals and ideas will become clearer as time goes on, where we can be additive alongside the PIT work that we're already doing. Really fortunate to have great partners in that work. As I said, Ford Foundation, who were original co-conspirators in launching this alongside Futures, McGovern Foundation, Pivotal Ventures, on the University Network, MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth, in our journalism work, and here at the local news summit, as you think about AI and journalism, Aspen Digital has been a great partner to us, and we work closely with their other funders such as Knight Foundation, Lenfest Institute, and have really been Omidyar Network. So I think we have a great cross-section of folks that care about these issues from different angles. One thing I will say, having traversed what was a lonely road as a tech and society funder for many years, is that, you know, we have always positioned ourselves as working as cross-functionally as possible across learning, workforce, and infrastructure, across geographies, across types of organizations and types of ideas. And I think that is something that is a little different and from other funders. So what I think is really exciting for us is to see more people integrating technology into their core strategies, especially as we think about AI and how it impacts this work, and sort of joining us in that, and that we're able to help folks see where their other priorities, whether they're education, traditional workforce development, climate, poverty alleviation, you know, on and on. Oh, poverty alleviation, I can't not mention Robin Hood and the Robin Hood Learning and Tech Fund. If Amber's here, she'll be mad at me if I forget that. So sorry, Amber. The work that we're doing to help other funders sort of see where technology can serve their priorities and how technology is impacting everything about all of our priorities as well.
Thanks. And I mean, speaking of too, we got some really interesting questions. We funded our first creative researcher this year. So maybe I'll kick this one over to Madison to say a little bit about our approach, about how we are exploring using creative research and the arts as a way to understand technology and society. Madison.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. Yeah, so I think when you saw the slide with our research fellows, you can see the multidisciplinarity of all of those scholars. And they all approach sort of these questions about technology and society from primarily social scientific methodologies and theoretical groundings. We this year wanted to expand that to include more creative outputs of research. So we're thinking about the intersection of creative practice and research to kind of expand the questions that we can ask about this really fast-moving technology landscape that we find ourselves in, and start thinking toward future possibilities of what could be, what society could look like as we are sort of swimming in all of these fast-moving technological changes. And so we're really excited to have our first sort of creative researcher in the fellowship, and are still exploring sort of what that might look like. If you were lucky enough to be here at the beginning of the webinar, a great example of that is the music that was playing at the front end, which was really forcing sort of us to think a little bit more about the intersection of our ecosystems, our bodies, and information infrastructures that we all rely so much on. And so I think more to come on that in the coming year, but it's an exciting endeavor in thinking about how the arts and science sort of intersect.
Thanks. We also had some questions about our plans for continuing on with our community-driven innovation work, which has been a focus of the past year, and sort of a related question that we're getting in the chat about supporting small business development and entrepreneurship as a part of our workforce portfolio. So could you say a little bit more about the evolution of that work and where we're taking it this year?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in here too as well. So I think for there, we're also, as John touched on a little bit, for what we're continuing to explore. So in terms of rural ecosystems, rural workforce ecosystems. So we're really trying to explore initiatives that continue to expand opportunity in rural ecosystems. And this also includes approaches to inclusive tech-based economic development. We've seen this especially with the tech hubs and other initiatives. So we were really trying to keep an eye on that, and partnering with organizations that are thinking about that and lifting up best practices. Josh, John, I don't know if you would add anything else.
Yeah, no, I think that was right. Sorry, I was in the chat feverishly responding to people there, so apologies.
No problem. And I guess just kind of rounding out the rest of our interest areas, we do have a couple of different questions just asking for a little bit more within our learning portfolio. There's been a question about some of our evidence-driven technology work, if we fund in school versus out of school, and where some of our policy and advocacy priorities lie specifically as it relates to our learning portfolio. Perhaps Josh and maybe Katie, you want to take that?
Yeah, I'd love for Katy to talk about, I mean, especially just coming off of where you were at last week, focused on ed tech and what quality evidence looks like.
Thanks, Josh. So some of you who who work in this space, I'm sure know that I've been on what I've called a bit of a secret mission to disrupt the ed tech ecosystem. We've had, from the early days of this organization, there was originally a focus on ed tech. At a certain point, I want to say it was 2017 or so, we looked at the landscape and said, hey, the market seems to be doing a really good job here. There's a proliferation of interesting things. There's some stuff coming up that's less good, some stuff that's more good. Like maybe we can take a step back from this and see sort of how the market plays out. And I think since then, particularly in the context of the pandemic, ESSER dollars that came down, and just the pace of innovation in AI, and particularly now in Gen AI, we see a lot of crap, pardon my language. And I think, there's a significant proliferation of sort of, someone called it the other day, a thin, shiny wrapper around some products that are maybe not great for impact on students' learning outcomes and are not actually helping educators do their best work. So when we talk about this evidence-driven edtech work, I'm talking about sort of our partners at places like Innovate EDU, the Global EdTech Trialing Network, Lean Lab, which is a grantee of ours, that are really focused on helping companies, whether they are nonprofit or profit, whatever, think about how to prioritize impact and not just sales goals when it comes to their sort of journey and development as startups. And obviously that can be difficult, even among the best impact investors, there's not enough money, like the Owl Ventures and the Reach Capitals of the world don't have enough money to fund the entire market of impact-driven work. But I think there's a lot of really great work toward integrating more evidence. Our partners at ISTE and others have really done a lot of work to try to build the frameworks and the integration of evidence. And we want to help support that on the philanthropic side by, again, helping our peer funders think about this question really critically, and to a certain extent within the private market where we have some influence with friends and partners in that world to think about how the ed tech market needs a little injection, I think, of some sanity and some learning. Just last week, I was at BET in the UK, which is a huge ed tech conference. And so I had the opportunity to see a lot of interesting work from around the world in ed tech companies globally. And I think we are also thinking a lot about how global influence can be brought into the US context and how we can think differently about cultural differences, learning differences, and the challenges that perhaps other countries have already addressed that we can integrate into edtech work.
Yeah, and I think the piece on the in-school versus out-of-school time, I think we look for both. I think with our lens on schools as community infrastructure, it's really focusing at the intersection of understanding both what happens in school and out of school, and usually within the community. And I think for us, as we think about out of school, we know oftentimes that doesn't include all the students. And so always looking for opportunities that whatever is happening in that out of school time space, how do you eventually make sure that it's infused in the day-to-day environment, and not that the day-to-day environment has to be in school, because we're also pushing the boundary and notion that learning just doesn't happen in a school. It actually can happen in the community. And so I think really exciting work and things that we're learning from our Atlanta work, but looking for opportunities to expand in that space as well.
Awesome. Before I jump into the next question, I'm going to take a few from the chat. I'm just seeing that there are a whole group of questions about how to connect with us, especially if you haven't previously connected with us. I recognize folks might need to drop off. So I'm going to put some links in the chat, and then we'll also have a slide at the end of the webinar, which will be at 2:15 Eastern, with events we're going to be. But just for now, for folks who do have to leave, let me just put our contact us form. Here's our LinkedIn page, which you can also feel free to get in touch with us. And then again, we'll come back to that event slide. Everyone will receive the slides tomorrow, but just wanted to get that in before if folks have to leave at the top of the hour. But yeah, all right. So the next. Oh,
our contact us form really does go to an actual email that is read by a human being, and we actually do look at those submissions and try to make as many meetings as humanly possible from them.
The human beings are on this call, so they are.
Yeah, I was going to say, and some of you have actually become partners and grantees through that submission form, so really appreciate that.
Yeah. Great, awesome. All right, so another sort of theme I was another theme I was picking up from the chat. There's a bunch of sort of questions related to various aspects of our tech policy work. There's been one about cybersecurity, one about quality open data. I saw another one about surveillance tech. So maybe, John, you could share a little bit more of our thinking about technology policy and where we're planning to go with that this year.
Yeah, I'd say a bit more. And I can address, I think, two of the questions that I saw too. On cybersecurity, we largely don't fund cybersecurity projects writ large, except to the extent that, designing cybersecurity and security into digital systems from the get-go is part of the design process, or at least should be part of the design process. So that's one thing we're thinking about, is how do we think about kind of designing of digital systems that work for everyone. And I can imagine that cyber is an important component of it. But we're not like we don't have like a big cybersecurity portfolio the way I know a couple other foundations do. I think it's important to actually sometimes say what we don't do as part of these discussions. I think that's an important thing to do too. On the data question, that's something we've been thinking about quite a bit as well, in thinking about how data is becoming infrastructure. So we're not just gathering data about infrastructure, but data is actually a foundational thing that LLMs are built on in particular, but it gets into a fuller range of things as well. So it's definitely something that's been on our mind. But I think more generally, I think that the way we are thinking about kind of technology policy is, I think, twofold. One is we really want to make sure that research into topics that are important to technology and technology policy is made available to policymakers. So we think about how do we bridge academic style research towards more of an active policy discussion. And I think one example of that is with our fellows cohort that Madison talked about. Our first year, we had fellows exclusively from research universities, but we broadened it out over the last 2 years to have probably 2/3 from research-based universities, but also about 1/3 at organizations that have a more explicit policy focus, be it Center for American Progress, Center for Democracy and Technology, and others who are helping to bridge that gap. And so I think that's an important piece of the puzzle. And the second piece I'd say is we really are thinking about like I said before, the design of these systems, and then how does policy guide that design, both public policy but also company practices as well. And so that's something that we are thinking more and more about how do we encourage the right guardrails and encourage the right approaches, so that we're not cleaning up after the fact when something goes wrong, that we really have more forethought into potential harms, but also potential benefits, and think about that from the get-go. So it tends to be this stance we try to take when we can.
Thanks, John. We've also got another question in the chat, which I think is worth exploring too, just about funder collaboratives. How do we work with our philanthropic partners and communities, like what kinds of relationships we have with other funders and what role that plays in our decision making and in our work.
I can start, just since I mentioned the collaboratives we're invested in currently on public interest technology have been hugely important. Josh, I know, mentioned in the chat that we're a member of the Workforce Development Funders for New York City. Historically, as a relatively small organization, we haven't participated in a ton of traditional funder collaboratives, just given the scale of our work. It didn't necessarily feel like the best commitment of resources. I think what we've come around to is finding really careful and intentional partnerships that usually are built around, sort of new ideas where our collaborative effort and a show that, multiple funders, because, we have influence, whether we deserve it or not, capital has influence, multiple funders sort of coming together behind a new idea like public interest tech or some of the groups that are forming to work on current AI issues, have value, credibility, and are important. And so I think when just in terms of our role in future funder collaboratives and how we like to work with others, we want to help spark that kind of innovation with our fellow funders and sort of get together around how can we, without having to burden ourselves with a process by which we end up with a super diluted set of grants because we're trying to make every funder happy, how can we, from our unique vantage points and our unique issue areas, come together around sort of a core idea and promote a core idea through work that may be varied. And so that's the sort of collaborative that I think is most intriguing to us, which is not to say that we're not open to other types, but really thinking about that kind of influence.
And if I think it was our 2022 annual report also has a list of the various collaboratives we're a part of, and we'll be updating that list this year, so you can see sort of exactly the spaces across all of our interest areas and our effective philanthropy work that we'll be engaging.
And I will say we'll have some very exciting news coming out in February that will talk about some exciting stuff that we're doing with some of our fellow peer funders as well. So stay tuned.
Thanks. We have another question, which I think was covered. Maybe we could just say a little bit more about sort of the interplay between our portfolios and how we try to work at the intersections, what that looks like in practice, and what we feel like we learn from that.
Yeah, I think maybe Kyla, do you want to talk a little bit about, especially on the knowledge and impact side, and the key learnings that you're thinking about and some of the new stuff that we have this year that will hopefully foster that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the knowledge and impact team here at Siegel is somewhat of a new focus for us. And that we've been doing this sort of work for a long time, but to have dedicated staff members allocated to it is new. And that sort of interplay and learning between interest areas is the whole point of that. So some of the mechanisms that we're going to be utilizing to sort of facilitate that interaction is one, excuse me, one part of that is giving data. We'll be able to solicit a lot of robust findings from our different interest areas and our different grantees through the survey platform there. And then we're going to be able to extract that and do data coding and be able to track learnings across different interest areas, which is super exciting for us and a new data capacity that we haven't had before. Another part of that is going to be intentionally convening our team more regularly to discuss these sort of learnings. Part of our engagement is that we show up really often in one-on-one settings and do a lot of oral reporting. So to make that most effective, we need to convene ourselves and to share those learnings and to share the things that are coming out of our different grantee relationships and being able to find those connections across portfolios. So those are a couple of things that we're thinking about that are really exciting opportunities for us to delve further into this. Ali and Josh, I don't know if you had anything else to add.
Yeah, I can add on just a little bit more about the community spaces that we talked about a little bit earlier in the presentation. So we're really thinking about how to design this space for our grantees to meet, network, and learn with other partners as well, particularly thinking about partners across different interest areas, across different fields, and especially because we know that a lot of our partners work very much at the intersection of all three interest areas. And so as we think about creating these spaces, we want to think about some key learning questions for the spaces and thinking about what grantees are trying to learn and see if there's any interplay between what all our different grantees are trying to learn kind of at the intersection of all three of our interest areas.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we have a question from the chat right now, which I think is a really good one, especially as we are thinking about how we're approaching our infrastructure portfolio this year. And that's, how are we thinking about the use of technology to better understand community needs and impact effective service delivery, which I know sort of that community-driven piece is elevated this year. So John and Madison, did you want to say a little bit about that?
I think we say just a little bit about that because I think this is an area of active learning, right, for us, which is how do we really engage with communities. And I think that there's another question in the chat about key lessons from multidimensional infrastructure and how our support is evolving. I think that's a similar question. I I think that, well, I'll say two things. One is I think that what we've learned over the past, I don't know, couple of years is that, I mean, one of the things we've learned many things. So one of the things is that people kind of get the physical infrastructure, right? They kind of understand roads and bridges and the physical piece, and they kind of get more and more the social dimension to it. But the digital is a little bit less clear to people, right? So I think that we want to push a little bit harder on the digital side. And the second thing I think we've learned too is that we believe as an organization we can be more effective at the front end of a design process, like when, to help people think about what the design looks like of multidimensional infrastructure, less the last mile of putting down the pavement or whatever the equivalent is in social and digital. And so, with that perspective, we really recognize that community engagement is essential in that design phase. If you get too far down the line without engaging communities in a meaningful way, it can be too late. And you can be playing catch up. So what does that look like in terms of grant making, in terms of approach is to be determined. And we're looking forward to diving in a bit more and learning about what that looks like. So that was a long-winded way of saying we're still figuring this stuff out. I don't know, Madison, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add, I mean, I would echo that there's many questions and we're still grappling with how many there are. I think one thing that actually circles back to the conversation about tech policy as well is the centrality of values and community determined values in shaping that work. So like we have I think, pretty well-founded understanding that, the design, dissemination and deployment of technology is really rooted in values and they're sort of embedded within that technology. We also see the process of policymaking and the dissemination of policies as embedded with values as well. And I think this also, touches a little bit on our sort of new exploration in climate, which is to say that we're not necessarily looking at helping develop climate tech as much as we're trying to better understand how climate is inevitably a big question in our multidimensional infrastructure framework and how technology is impacting climate, what the impacts of emerging technology are on the climate, and asking some of those really broad questions to explore, I think, a sort of burgeoning area of inquiry for many people. So.
Thanks. And thanks for tackling another question in the chat. Love to see it. I know my team has also been answering questions directly too. So if you do, wanted to see if something's answered, please toggle over to the answered section. Just a few more left here from both the pre-submitted survey and the live questions, but perhaps I'll throw this one over to Katy. If you could just talk a little bit more, what we mean when we say sector leadership, and maybe specifically about like how we want to show up in the sectors, both in our interest areas and in the philanthropic sector.
Yeah, I mean, what a good time to be answering that question as I'm on my third trip in 3 weeks to try to find sector leadership across the globe. We are thinking about all of the spaces where influence can occur. And, John, when he created our research department, did a prioritization exercise around audiences and where we fit in that world. And I think there's a neat chart available on that front, but really thinking about engaging with the folks who influence policy and thinking about engaging with academics and our research work, thinking about engaging with practitioners, thinking about engaging with VCs who are shaping technology, startup founders who are inventing it. All of the above are relevant in one way or another. I think the prioritization that we try to do is around these learnings that we're seeking, right? These inquiries that we have, who are the people that are best positioned to help us derive insights into those and how can we connect with them? And then at the same time, who are the people that most need to hear about the sort of overlapping intersectional issues that we're thinking about, who may not be as far along in their learning journey or understanding of these things as we are, or some of our grantees and partners are really. And so it's a long way of saying we're sort of connecting with everyone one way or another, but trying to prioritize the community members that are closest to the issues that we care about and that we think have the most probable and feasible solutions and ideas for solutions, and the folks that can help scale those things to reach greater audiences, whether through actual growth or replication or propagation and helping seed new models around the country.
Thanks. And Morgan Frank, whoever you are, looks like you have our final question of the day. How are we prioritizing basic research versus public engagement versus deployment?
Yeah, maybe I
Yeah.
can tackle that one. I will say this at a personal level, I have very little tolerance for basic research that never sees the light of day. So it is definitely a priority to think about public engagement, dissemination, deployment, et cetera. So feel that that's essential as part of the process. So when we, typically the funding that we do for research, and like I said, like we've funded research since our founding in different contexts. The funding that we've done is primarily aimed at research centers, be it university-based or outside academia. But the way we tend to fund is we tend to give the organizations the flexibility to determine how to spend those resources. And a lot of times, what is not funded is the dissemination, is the public engagement, is the repackaging of a academic peer-reviewed article into a version that's understandable by a normal human being, or policymakers or journalists, right? And so there's a lot of extremely relevant research in the areas that we articulated around technology and society that is really important, that doesn't get enough attention more broadly. So we try to work with organizations who value that aspect of their work. They value speaking with people outside of their university or outside the organization, and really feel that's important. And kind of aligned with that, we feel like it's important to be multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary in the work. And you see from our list of fellows that we've actively, sourced them from communications departments, library science departments, computer science departments, economics departments, right? And so we try to aim to bring together people with different perspectives who are working on not necessarily even the same kind of project, but different projects, but they can all speak to each other and um, share learning, share findings, and hopefully use the kind of the smashing of different half ideas to form something better at the end of the day. So I'm not sure if that's the gist of where the question was going, but that tends to be some of how we think about it.
Great. And if you would like to continue the conversation, you can always reach out to us at our Contact Us form. Thanks for popping up the slide. So I'll drop this back in the chat. And again, we welcome new partners. I know there was a bunch of questions about that. And we welcome meeting new folks, hearing what you're doing, how your work is evolving, how it's playing at our intersections. We've got links to the Contact Us and our LinkedIn. You can reach out to us either way. Yep. And our Insights page. Thank you so much, Dylan. And I will kick it back over to Josh, John, Katy for some final and closing thoughts.
Should we speak? We could speak in chorus and see if we can finish each other's sentences and how tightly aligned our leadership team is. I'll say thank you all so much. And it's always amazing to get a chance to talk about this work. We're so privileged to be able to do this every day. Even when I'm on my 37th flight and I don't think so, it is very true. And it is the partners that make it so. So thank you.
And I'll just say, first of all, thank you to Laura and Ellery, who behind the scenes have been orchestrating and curating this and keeping us on script, and on time, which is not an easy thing to do. And thanks to everyone else for joining and asking the questions and really following up. Really excited. I mean, I think it's such an interesting and exciting moment in time, given what we are focused on and what we've shared today, and just what you all are doing out in the world, that I'm excited to continue to learn, ask these questions, and figure out how we can partner together. And so thank you all.
Yeah, and then I would just echo what exactly Katy and Josh said. Thank you for coming and listening, and looking forward to connecting with you throughout the year.
Thanks so much, everyone. We'll send out the slides and stay tuned for our 2023 feedback post and the rest of all of the work that we're going to do and highlight this year. Thanks.